Hello and welcome to the sixth episode of A Closer Look starting this year with Pakistan. My name is Nicolas Singer. I'm the Executive Director of Asia Society Switzerland, coming to you live today from Zurich. A Closer Look is a series by Asia Society Switzerland with the support of BDO and the Institute of Asian and Oriental Studies at the University of Zurich, shedding light on different Asian countries through the eyes of leading local voices. We have Simona Grano, the Senior Lecturer and Director of the Taiwan Studies Project at the University of Zurich, and Noel Clohane, Global Head of Regulatory and Public Policy at BDO, who will join us as moderators for the series. They're both here and can quickly say hi. Hi, Noel. Hi, Simona. Noel and Simona will be your moderators for the remaining 4 episodes of the series, which will air in 2-week intervals starting today. We have episodes coming up on the Philippines, on Kyrgyzstan, on Singapore, and on Mongolia. Thank you very much, Noel and Simona, for joining us for this. I very much look forward to this entire series. Pakistan, as you can see on the map, is geographically bounded by Iran, Afghanistan, China, India, and the coast of the Arabian Sea. It controls part of the disputed Kashmir region along the Western Himalayas, of which other sections are governed by India and China. With a population of 230 million, Pakistan is the 5th most populous country in the world. Nearly 2/3 of the population is under 30 years of age. The major ethnic group in Pakistan are the Punjabis, who make up about half of the population. The rest can be divided broadly into 4 more major and several minor ethnic groups, forming a true ethnic and cultural melting pot. This fairly complex picture is also reflected in Pakistan's linguistic landscape, with more than 70 languages spoken as first languages. Among these, Punjabi is the most widely spoken by 40% of the population. While Urdu is the national language and the only official language besides English, it is the mother tongue of only 7% of the population. Almost all of the people of Pakistan are Muslims, or at least follow Islamic traditions. The majority of them belong to the Sunni sect. Only less than 4% of the population is non-Muslim, including Christians and Hindus. In this series, we always talk about the so-called Human Development Index of a country. Pakistan here ranks, those are numbers of 2020, 154th out of 189 countries, which places it right in the middle between 2 of its neighbors. It's higher ranked than Afghanistan, but with a score quite significantly lower than India. As you know, a country scores higher on the Human Development Index when the lifespan is higher, the education level is higher, and the gross national income per capita is higher. Pakistan encompasses a very rich diversity of landscapes. More than half of the country consists of rough mountainous terrain and plateaus. The Karakoram range of the Himalayas is home to one of the world's longest mountain glaciers, the Siachen Glacier. The climate is arid continental and characterized by extreme variations of temperature, both seasonally and daily. Once dominated by agriculture, Pakistan's economy has become considerably diversified since independence. The sectors, trade and services combined, have grown into the largest component of the economy. Cotton is Pakistan's leading cash crop. Other export products likewise come mostly from agriculture-based industries like leather goods and carpets. The country also has enormous reserves of limestone, which forms the basis of its growing cement industry. And finally, Pakistan is one of the world's leading producers of opium poppy. In terms of the structure of its economy, Pakistan resembles the middle-income countries of East and Southeast Asia more than the poorer countries of the Indian subcontinent. With a GDP per capita of roughly $1,200 US, Pakistan has just 2/3 of India's output, but a much higher output than Afghanistan. Compared to other South Asian countries, considerably less people in Pakistan are living in absolute poverty. Let's talk a little bit of history. And of course, this is going to be very quick. There will be much more to say, but we'll leave it at that for the time being. So during the period of British colonial rule, what is now Pakistan was part of India. The new state of Pakistan came into existence in 1947. And yes, that is 75 years ago this year. So this is a big year for both Pakistan and India, when India was partitioned at the end of British rule. This led to mass killing and the largest demographic movement in recorded history. The conflict between the 2 countries continues till today, primarily revolving around the Kashmir region. Since 1998, both countries have also possessed nuclear weapons, furthering heightening tensions between them. In 1971, a civil war between East and West Pakistan resulted in independence for East Pakistan, which of course became today's Bangladesh. And if you're interested in Bangladesh, I should point out that we did an episode of A Closer Look on Bangladesh last year, which is available on YouTube that you can go check out. The military has ruled Pakistan for nearly half the country's history since it gained independence. Even during civilian rule, army generals have wielded enormous power, setting the agenda for the country's foreign and security policies and tolerance of extremist groups, including the Afghan Taliban. For governments, finding a balance between those envisioning a theocratic state and those determined to pursue a liberal progressive agenda has proved to be the most significant test. The current Prime Minister, Imran Khan, a former cricket star, you can see him here pictured, has been in power since 2018. During the campaign, Khan faced accusations, which he denied, of being the favorite candidate of Pakistan's powerful army and that military intelligence was working to discredit his rivals. With this short introduction over, let me now introduce the two guests that we have here today, and I'm very excited they're both joining us. Saad Haroon was awarded second place in the Funniest Person in the World competition. He's a world-renowned comedian, writer, and performer. He created Pakistan's first improvisational comedy troupe called Blackfish. He has also written 5 solo shows and performed in prestigious venues all over the world. He was also head writer and host of The Real News, Pakistan's first English-spoken comedy show on television. Also joining us is Yusra Askari, a print and electronic media journalist and an Asia 21 fellow. That's the Young Generation program of Asia Society globally. She's a strong proponent of a less hostile regional narrative, increased people-to-people interaction, and better cross-border ties, a position she continues to endorse one story at a time in her role as the Pakistan correspondent for New Delhi Television Limited. Yusra is also former visiting fellow of the Observer Research Foundation in Mumbai. Saad and Yusra, thank you very much for being here and welcome to Asia Society Switzerland.
Hi, nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
As you know, we try to always follow the same structure in these closer look conversations. There's a series of standardized questions that I wanted to ask you. Saad, I'm starting with you first. What fascinates you most about Pakistan and what concerns you most about your country?
So I guess as a comedian, what fascinates me the most about Pakistan is that, you know, even though we kind of have our own issues and our own problems that are kind of ongoing, and I mean this at a regular people level, we still find the humor in it all the time. So these days there's a severe gas shortage in Karachi, so and it annoys everyone all the time. And but you know, in true Pakistani fashion, they've kind of spun it and found the humor in it. And you'll find these memes on the internet for, you know, these bridal couples holding like a canister of LNG as the dowry, and they're smiling, and you know, so they actually just it fascinates me that even in kind of these kind of even dark, strange times, we'll find something funny to, you know, to look forward to even in those. And I guess what worries me is probably the same thing, that, you know, what happens when we run out of our sense of humor? Like what happens when that well just kind of bubbles over and it's less comedy, more street theater? I think that that worries me a bit. Thank you.
Yusra, I mentioned before that, of course, this year is, you know, 75 years since partition and since independence. I know this is a broad question to answer in only a few short words, but I'm going to ask it to you anyway. If you had to judge the current state of Pakistan at 75 years old, you know, that's a considerable age for a country. How would you do it? How are we 75 years into independence?
That's a hard one. It's not as easy as it seems. I would say one step forward, 2 steps back. And with each passing day, we find ourselves sink to a new low or rise to a new high. But I think they come so far and few that we haven't yet reached the potential that we can. So we're still struggling, still aiming, still trying, and a lot more to be done.
Excellent. Saad, coming back to you, what, in your view, is the biggest misconception people have about Pakistan? What do you find yourself having to correct most often, an impression that people have about the country?
Oh my God. So I think everything about Pakistan right now is a misconception. You know, I really feel bad for like the expat population, because they kind of turn everyone into an ambassador all the time. You know, every kind of foreign friend they have will be like, so why did they shoot Malala? Tell me, explain it from the beginning. And then also, why? Are you sure they can have 4 wives? And why do they have 4 wives? And, it's kind of one of those things where it's just, a lot of times they don't, if you're not from Pakistan, you can't find it on a map. If you're talking about Pakistan, you have to give these explanations. And so I think there's all in all, the entire thing's a misconception. And, there's a lot of kind of backstory to everything. And I think over the next, over the course of this interview, we'll probably get into a lot of it too.
Thank you. Yusra, obviously, I said in the introduction that you do a lot of work on the India-Pakistan relationship, which is a, dare I say, complicated one, and we're going to get into it a little bit more. But maybe to start us off, the 2 countries share a lot of history. They have a lot of things in common. They also have some obvious differences. What, in your view, is sort of the biggest difference right now between the two? Where would you point out if we were to ask you, sort of how they are not the same, how they're different from each other?
The biggest difference is simply one and one alone. And I would say this with the utmost conviction in my heart, having spent a lot of time in India and having been witness to the warmth that they give you. The only difference is diplomatic. We're intrinsically the same people, divided into 2 halves. We're part of the same fabric, cut into 2. You can change how you model that fabric. You can change how you design that fabric, but you can't change the fabric itself. So we are the same people. Our kind of positions vis-a-vis various issues are largely the same. They may be cloaked differently, they may be packaged differently, but the biggest differences are diplomatic, not otherwise.
Thank you. And to finish off this sort of introductory part, I'm going to ask both of you the same question, Saad first and then Yusra. What is the one thing people should know about you that I didn't mention in the introduction yet to better understand your view and your perspective on Pakistan and today's conversation?
Okay, I guess the one thing they should know about me is that I take a lot of naps. I'm constantly taking naps because whenever something goes wrong, you just take a nap, get up and you're like, okay, I'm ready to kind of, so I think that we're going to talk about a lot of very kind of deep kind of issues today. And so I've taken my nap, so I'm ready for this.
Excellent. We're not usually sort of in the self-help business here at Asia Studies Switzerland, but the taking a nap advice, I think, is really good. I think I will do that from now on. If something happens in geopolitics that I find annoying or disturbing, I will go take a nap. Yusra, what should people know about you to sort of better understand your viewpoint for today's conversation?
I wish my answer were as witty as Saad's, but unfortunately not. I think what people should know about me is that despite being a journalist who likes to report the stories, I also like to be part of the solution and pitch in where required and be part of the solution-making processes compared to being part of the problem. So for me, it is important to take ownership of where state resources sometimes fall short and play whatever part one can to help wherever one can. So.
Thank you. Let me start here so for this main part of the conversation. So of course, we went back and you guys both have sort of a relationship with Asia Society. Yusra, of course, you are a fellow and an alumna of our Asia 21 program. You've attended many of the Asia 21 events. And so we just talked about this before we went live. There's actually a podcast recording of you from Asia Society all the way back from 2011. And I listened to it the other day. And it kind of starts by you saying you're commenting on the then political situation in Pakistan, which is also such that it probably required a lot of napping. And what you said about it is that in Pakistan is like a bad Bollywood movie. And many of the people joining us today probably have seen their fair share of Bollywood movies, including the bad ones. So this was 11 years ago. How has the plot changed? So has Pakistan become, is it still a Bollywood movie? Has it become a better Bollywood movie? Has it gotten even worse? So how has the plot developed since 2011?
The thing about Bollywood movies are they're incredibly long, so, when you think that they're over, they're just beginning. So I think that, it's been 11 years, we might still be in the same movie, so it's a chance that that I couldn't say that it's gotten better or worse, because I think that there's still a half sister or a stepsister or a sibling or someone who is lost at birth, who has the same tattoo that I do, who might up right now and just save the day. So you never know.
Excellent. So my experience with Bollywood movies is also that, at least in India, people have a habit of leaving the cinema like usually before the movie is over. So when like the action part is done, sort of like the final resolution is usually people will walk out for that. So have we not reached that point yet? Are people still watching?
Oh, no. So I didn't know that. Oh, yeah. So people are still watching. People are watching kind of very intently. I think the thing with Bollywood movies is that, you know, I mean, they surpass Hollywood by miles and miles in the fact that they can just, they can kind of tap in on your emotional, you know, on this emotional part of your body. Like they'll really pull on your heartstrings. Like you'll be crying in a Bollywood movie and you really, you know, you don't know why. You're like, why? This is, so I think that I think that, like I said before, we're in this Bollywood movie right now. We don't know kind of what phase this is. I think that there's a lot of comic relief in between. So we're lucky for that.
Excellent. Yusra, both you and Saad, you're currently in Karachi. You both spent large parts of your life there. Karachi, of course, was the first capital of Pakistan, still is the industrial and business center of the country. And Yusra, I think you once said that Karachi is kind of like a mini Pakistan. It's kind of like the embodiment of the country as a city. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what can we learn about Pakistan as a country by looking at Karachi, the city?
I think Karachi provides for you a breakdown of the diversity of terrain, of language, of understanding, of nuances, of biases, of complexes. But I think what Karachi also defines for you is the all-embracing nature of Pakistan and how it welcomes everyone into its fold. It may not be able to provide for them, much like Karachi can't provide for its vast, vast population, but I think it encompasses the very feeling, the very compassion that Pakistan brings to the table. And as it is very often said, Karachi is an emotion. So you have to experience it to actually understand what it is. So I invite all of you to come by one day and hopefully experience the madness that Karachi is, or what our country brings.
How would you say, how is Karachi different from other Pakistani cities, and why? So what makes for this sort of the special Karachi emotion as compared to, you know, the Islamabad emotion or the Lahore emotion, if that's even a thing?
I think Karachi has not, I mean, it's often said Karachi hasn't been given its due share of the amount of economic revenue, the amount of, you know, what it churns out for the country. It hasn't been given back as much as it should be. So Karachi as a city is desensitized, but very, very resilient. And I think that is what defines a Pakistan at large and us as a people. So Karachi, in essence, encompasses the very feeling, the very emotion that Pakistan brings to the fore.
Okay, thank you. Let's talk a little bit, Saad, about both of your professions, and obviously, Saad, you're a comedian. That is, first of all, a very interesting profession, and we talked about this in prep. Also, one that may not have been super easy during the last few years of the pandemic, but probably also one that presents its general challenges in a country like Pakistan. So, talk a little bit to us, if you will. You've been in the industry for about 20 years. How has it developed? So, how does the Pakistani comedy scene look today as compared to 20 years ago? Has it become larger? Has it become smaller? Is the humor that sort of goes well with the audience is still the same? Are there certain like humorous trends in Pakistan that you've observed over the last few years or decades?
Well, okay, I guess that's a long question. I think, yeah, it's been 20 years of kind of me doing comedy in Pakistan. And I think in general, kind of artists kind of struggle. Like for us, you know, it's kind of, I would group all artists, all musicians, all comedians, kind of everyone into the same kind of group, to be like, we really kind of push to kind of have our art form, and mine being comedy, be accepted. And I think that when I became a comedian, I understood that that's my mission. You know, the medium is also the message for me. So kind of going and performing and showing people that comedy is important and laughing is important and laughter is important, and just kind of basically having like just being happy is an important kind of mission for me. And so a lot of the times, even though we might not have the audiences or the infrastructure that other places in the world do, we still kind of, all the comedians out there, even the younger generation, understands that it's just important to kind of do a comedy show. And so when we first started doing these shows, we used to charge like 100 rupees a ticket for our improv shows, you know, just 100 rupees a ticket, because it was just about doing this comedy. Now during the pandemic and my loss of income, I realized I should have charged much more at that time, but I didn't. Yeah, maybe in the future my tickets might be more expensive, but for right now, I get to do comedy, and hopefully, you know, going forward, I will get to do a lot more after this pandemic, and when kind of things open up. You know, if, you know, the Greek alphabet doesn't attack us one more time and bog us down in this other world of COVID. And what I think, what was your last, I think your last question was kind of what resonates with an audience over here.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what resonates really well with audiences, and that's actually a great question because I talk about this a lot with younger comedians as well, is that a lot of times as a Pakistani over here and abroad, and this leads to your first question as well, is that we have this constant feeling of disenfranchisement, which is that nobody is listening to us, you know, when that people are talking at us all the time rather than having us be part of the conversation. So as a comedian, you actually get to stand up in front of people and talk about what they want to hear about, you know, and what they want to talk about and what they feel is important to them. And so they kind of become part of a conversation and part of a wider kind of an idea that, yeah, we're all on the same page. We're all suffering from the same things.
Thank you. I would have more questions on specifically the comedy scene, but we can come back to that. One thing we wanted to address today is also the role of sort of message control, online censorship in Pakistan. Yusra, Pakistan has one of the world's strictest blasphemy laws. It's kind of obviously, as is normal with these laws, a very broad and vague definition, so it's easy to kind of misuse. I'm assuming that law has had an impact on either of your professions as a comedian, as a journalist. So Yusra, how do you see it? So has it personally affected you? How do you see, or how would you judge its impact sort of on public debate and public life in Pakistan?
I think as we move ahead, there's a lot less that can be said, a lot less that can be written, but that hasn't prevented Pakistan's thinkers, doers, speakers, writers from doing so. And I think pushing the bar each day, trying to find ways to say things, becoming a voice for the voiceless is a daily struggle, but it has to be done in a country like Pakistan. Yes, of course, there are repercussions. Those must be brought into consideration before one does take forward a narrative. But I think on the whole, journalists, thinkers, doers in Pakistan are not refraining from saying things as they are and pushing where one needs to push.
Yeah, thank you. Saad, coming back to your work as a comedian, one thing you said is that you like to address stereotypes and break taboo topics in Pakistani society. Can you give us a few examples? So what are the things that are usually being left unsaid in Pakistani daily life that you're trying to address in your programs?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of things I talk about. Culturally, one thing I talk about is that in our culture, our cousins get married to our cousins a lot. Basically, in other parts of the world, this does not happen. And so, of course, scientifically speaking, this is something that you should refrain from doing. But still, it's, culturally and religiously, it's not a taboo. It's a very, very common thing that happens over here. And so for me to kind of talk about that, it is to kind of, so I remember there was a joke I used to do before, which was that, our cousins are marrying all our cousins. It's, it's our theory of relativity. It's the science of marrying our cousins. It's the shortest distance between two uncles is a straight aunt, so, I mean, so you kind of, just do these, you gotta really, I mean, the thing is that we just don't talk about it, and just the repercussions of these actions, yes, them being legal and them being allowed and culturally practiced, but are there certain practices under that umbrella that we should refrain from doing? And so, you kind of poke a lot of nerves, because I've had people who are cousins who are married in the audience come up to me after a show and be like, we're cousins, we did not like that joke, but it starts the conversation, it starts the conversation, and that's how it goes. And then also, going back to the question that you asked, Yusra, I mean, I made this song once, and it was called Burqa Woman. It was a parody of a song, Pretty Woman, so I made a parody song called Burqa Woman, and so it was all about the idea of, kind of looking at a woman in a burqa and just looking at her as a woman, rather than someone in a burqa and something. And then kind of, do you look at her in a religious context? Because a burqa technically is not, and it's not kind of religious, depending on who you ask. So I think that I do tackle all of these things in my own way. And, sometimes I talk and sometimes I stay quiet, and it just depends, on the day or the day after.
And I'm curious, are there any of these sort of taboo topics that have changed over the last 10, 20 years or so? Are there topics that used to be taboo and now are sort of being discussed more openly? Or are there even topics that used to be discussed much more openly that have now sort of started to become taboos? Are you seeing shifts within that setting of topics?
Yeah, there are definitely shifts. There are definitely shifts in things going forward. And I'm glad you asked that, because, we kind of always start the conversation with, the idea of, oh, Pakistan has these kind of blasphemy laws, and then, we restrict kind of the things that we talk about. But we never kind of start at the beginning of the conversation, which is that, Pakistan is a really conservative society. Like, the entire country, by and large, has grown up with the religion of Islam as, the best way to put it, is part of their life, as a member of their family. You wake to it, you eat to it, you think about it during your day, you get married during it, you sleep with it. And so there's a huge kind of, there's a huge base of people out there that kind of really truly believe in these laws. They believe in kind of what they're saying. They don't look at the misuse of them or what's happening. They look at these laws as protecting something that they have grown up with, that they have experienced. And so for people, like me, who talk openly about kind of issues and everything like that, you have to keep both those kind of worlds in mind, from where these kind of, because these are relatives of yours. These are my cousins. This is my family. These are my friends who kind of come. And so I think, I don't know, I think maybe even Yusra deals with this, where we're also constantly evolving our approach within our art to kind of deal with that, and so I think that you can, we can't, when they say pushing the boundaries, that's what we do. You can't go all the way over the boundary, but we're right behind it, pushing it as hard as we can so that we can get to where we need to go.
All right. I do want to spend some time talking about sort of the political landscape in Pakistan. And Yusra, we briefly talked about this before we came live with today's call. So obviously, Prime Minister Khan has been in office since 2018, but there are some signs of trouble ahead. I read one article that predicted for 2022 to be a horrible year for Imran Khan. So can you position broadly for us the current political landscape and sort of the stability of Khan's government? Is he still very popular? Is he facing a little bit of criticism, or is he basically about to be impeached?
I think the criticism that Mr. Khan is faced with is not little by any stretch of anyone's imagination. The kind of promises he made before he came into power were immense. And I think the past few years, he has failed to deliver on most of them, if not all of them. But at the moment, what I do think, things have not come to a head. There is a lot of pressure on his government. There is much talk about a no confidence motion. But at the moment, things have not come to a boil. What we will see 2022 doing is plotting the trajectory of Pakistan's political landscape for the next 5 years. So how the next year pans out before we head into election year next year, 2023, will define not only Mr. Khan's political future, but also Pakistan's politics at large, and how the next 5 years will be and where they will take us.
Could you expand on that a little bit? So what are sort of the different trajectories that Pakistan could get on this year that would then influence for the coming 5 years? What are the options that we see?
I think at the moment ambiguous, because Pakistan is fast running out of democratic options, with several parties and their leadership now in exile or restricted from participating in active politics. One finds those democratic options fairly limited. But how the next few months will shape up in terms of alliances, political relationships, we will only have to wait and watch. And I think it'll be an interesting 11 months, so to say, because election year will see a lot of political activity, a lot of new alliances. And as I say, politics makes a strange bedfellow. So we'll see a lot more happening. So we're a place to watch out for.
When we talk about Pakistani politics, of course, sort of one big entity, Saad, that we have to talk about is the military and the army. Obviously, 2018 was a democratic transition, and the current government has been elected, but still, so the army kind of looms large as a political player. So, what's your current assessment, for an outsider like me who kind of has heard about that but doesn't really sort of know the details? How should we think about the Pakistani military as a political player? Where do they stand? What kind of influence do they have? Maybe what do they ultimately want?
I think that there's one thing that always is true about Pakistan, and that is that might is right over here. And so it starts kind of within your street, and then it goes to your neighborhood, and it goes to your town, and it goes to, and so literally on every level, it doesn't kind of come to the rule of law or, what's right or what's wrong. It's just about might is right, and we live in a country where the Pakistan Army is the most powerful institution by far, as opposed to anyone else. And so they pretty much rule the roost and have kind of always done so. I mean, as a comedian speaking, there's times when I've gotten away with kind of, doing jokes about, the armed forces and the army and stuff like that. It's never been kind of anything kind of overtly to get me in trouble or anything, but it was always kind of accepted that you can kind of talk about it right now. But I do feel that more and more that avenue to kind of even just bring it up in conversation, maybe it's me, maybe I'm getting more paranoid as I get older or whatever, but it just seems that, the avenues of free speech kind of, even when you could kind of nuance, even if it was nuanced, was much more ready, and you could do it and partake in it much more readily than you can now. So I do think that I do hope that it's one of those things where I have to say that I do know a lot of people are part of the conversation now. It is discussed. And this wasn't I can remember 20 years ago, this was not the case, that people would just openly discuss, like who should be in control of Pakistan, how should they be in control of Pakistan. But now that the conversation started, it has started, and I don't see it going away.
Why do you think it has started? So was there a trigger that sort of made the country go from this not being something that one could publicly discuss to a place where, as I understand you, at least there is a public debate, and you don't think it's gonna be easy to suppress it?
I think that the whatever political players they are in the country, be they the institutional ones, made a decision kind of very overtly to be part of the system. And once you are part of the system, and it's kind of, because there were everyone would have their own conspiracy theories before now, because that, what did this? Was it the forces, or was it politicians, or was it the US, or what kind of conspiracy was it? But now, by and large, all the political players in the system have announced that they are in the system. And once you've announced that you're part of the system, then you are just part of the conversation. People will discuss it and be like, well, what was their role here?
Thank you. It's not time now, I think, to bring in some of the questions that we've been receiving from the audience. There are already quite a few, and many of them are great. So thank you to those of you who've already submitted a question. If you still want to submit one, please do so now. I saw that there are actually 3 different questions about Pakistan's relationship with 3 of its different neighbors. So I do want to address those maybe in turn, and start with the first one also, because that is, you know, sort of one of sort of the topic that's being discussed a lot currently, and of course the situation in Afghanistan. Yusra, the Pakistani government has fairly quickly sort of, you know, accepted and recognized the new government run by the Taliban in Afghanistan. How would you characterize the relationship between the countries, and maybe more specifically between the 2 current governments? Obviously, you know, Afghanistan and instability in Afghanistan on Pakistan's border is a problem for Pakistan as well. So, what's the view of Pakistani leadership on Afghanistan right now?
I think the kind of celebratory tone that we had when the takeover did happen, or the kind of tone of happiness, so to say, that our so-called, you know, official quarters had when the takeover of Kabul happened, has now suddenly soured, or is somewhat souring, after there have been multiple cross-border attacks stemming from Afghanistan into Pakistan. So there does seem some kind of, not stalemate, but some kind of strain on that equation, some kind of pressure between the 2 otherwise very friendly allies. So at the moment, I do think there is a precarious turn in this so-called friendship that is. So it is one that one will have to wait and watch, because the kind of terror attacks that have been happening in Pakistan are largely, they are believed to be stemming from Afghanistan. And if they continue with the frequency they have been, and we do receive reports that they will increase in intensity and in frequency, I think there will be an evident fallout of at some given point between the 2.
Thank you. Let me continue maybe straight on, because obviously that's a big topic that I think we've only addressed a little bit so far in this conversation, and we should go a little bit more into detail with you, Yusra, and with the Pakistani-India relationship. I have a great question here from the audience, referring to what you said at the beginning, where you said that, you know, this gap between India and Pakistan is mainly a diplomatic one. It's a political one. You know, this is essentially, you know, this is a shared history. Does that mean, that's the question here, that this gap could eventually be bridged in some kind of way? And if not, sort of, you know, why do you think, what's holding it back? So if sort of the default position is a closer relationship, a more unified relationship, what's holding us back from getting there?
Are you saying the diplomatic gap, the bridging of the diplomatic gap?
Yes, I guess that's where the question goes. Yes.
I think it will serve no country's governments to actually befriend the other, because over 75 years, we've actually demonized one another, pointed fingers, blamed each other for every little thing that goes wrong. Anything that happens in Pakistan, India is blamed. Anything that happens in India, Pakistan is blamed. So I think if we let go of this huge demon we've created next door, we will fail to answer all those questions that are asked repeatedly as to who is responsible for the shortcomings of a government, of a social structure, of an infrastructure. And I don't see these diplomatic differences going away. They may be lessened in magnitude, but they will not go away anytime soon.
Maybe switching perspectives a little bit and looking, you know, towards Pakistan from the other side, from the Indian side. What influence does the current Indian government, you know, which is pursuing somewhat of a nationalistic tone, sort of a Hindu nationalistic tone and policies? My sense is that would sort of, you know, that would inevitably have a negative effect on relationships. Is that true, or do you see? Is there a potential, I guess is what I'm asking, of the relationship becoming better, assuming both countries have the same kinds of governments as they have today? So Imran Khan led government on the Pakistani side, and Narendra Modi, or at least BJP, led government on the Indian side.
I don't think things are getting better between the 2 countries. In fact, I think over the last 5 years, things have only gotten worse. I do remember being in Bombay in 2016, and I was there with a bunch of Pakistani photographers, 8 to be precise, and we were chased out by a bunch of party cadre from one of their leading political parties. They came in, they shouted slogans. We were at the Bombay Press Club. And all it took for us to hastily leave Bombay was 25 men shouting anti-Pakistan slogans. And this is us having gone there as a larger group. So I fail to see how smaller groups, how people as individuals will actually make that trip across. Kartarpur, differently, is an absolute bubble. I mean, it's one of those diplomatic bubbles that show us that things can be done if there is political will, if there is a political vision to do so. But other than Kartarpur, I honestly don't see any kind of hand being extended one way or the other in the near future unless things change dramatically.
Thank you. There would obviously be so much more to say and ask on the Pakistani-India relationship. That's certainly a subject for another time. Let me, Saad, ask you about the third neighbor of Pakistan where we've received questions, and of course that is China. Now, the Pakistani-China relationship seems to me it's hailed often from like both sides, sort of on the official level from both governments. It's a very strong one. It's a deep friendship. There's close collaboration. We have the China-Pakistan economic corridor, where there's been a lot of investment. It's part of the Belt and Road Initiative. It's usually kind of like the project, especially Chinese officials like to point to as a success story. I would like to hear from you sort of how how average normal Pakistanis see the relationship with China. Is that a relationship that is a frequent topic? Is it being discussed? Is it something that comes up in your shows, or is that something that's very far removed, sort of more happening on a political level?
Oh no, I think we've heard for many, many years, even when you're growing up in Pakistan, that China is Pakistan's fast friend. It's our friend and everything. And it's kind of it's kind of the counterpoint to what Yusra was talking about before, which is that, most Pakistanis have not met an Indian, but that India is, India is the enemy, and stuff like that. And then on the other side, we've been told China is our friend and they're helping us, but not many people have actually met any Chinese people either. It's just kind of like these narratives that we've been given as we've kind of grown up over here. And most people believe it, but it also stands true because there's so much we get so much negativity from the rest of the world about kind of what Pakistan is and what their role is and how it's a backward country and everything like that. That kind of when people talk about, hey, there's this one huge, powerful ally you have, you kind of feel proud of it. You're like, oh, see, we have a friend. They're right here. We can go. They're going to support us. They give us a lot of cash. Why are you complaining? It's kind of that narrative.
Thank you. There's another question that it's a short one, or at least one that may have a short answer from fellow moderator of this series, Noel Clohane, Yusra, and he asks, no Pakistani prime minister has ever finished his term. Will Imran Khan finish his?
There is no definitive answer for that one. We've seen Mr. Sharif near the finish line, and we've seen him take 2 steps back and hand over the mantle to one of his party leaders. There is no definitive answer. We'll have to wait till 2023. Pakistan has always been known to have early elections. Will we follow the trend? Will we keep up with our reputation of having no prime minister completed his or her term? We'll have to wait and watch.
Thank you. Maybe as a last question from the audience before we go into a wrap up, there's a really good one that I like about the Pakistan's cultural scene and cultural movement. Obviously, Pakistan has an incredibly vibrant cultural and creative scene. And the question says, and I think they're absolutely right, is that's not something that we hear a lot about, in our part of the world, in Europe, probably also in the US. So the dominant narrative on Pakistan tends to be a political one, a geopolitical one, a security question. Yet the country does have this very sort of large and diverse creative production, and of course you're both part of that. So can you talk a little bit, Saad, about how how do you see the chances? Do you see any development of maybe Pakistani culture being a bit more recognized in places outside of the country? Is that something that we see happening?
Oh, I mean, I think that would be my dream come true if I saw it happen, and I write a lot of comedy about this as well. It's not just Pakistan. I feel like there's a lot of just poor countries that feel disenfranchised, because they never get to be part of the conversation. It's just the rich countries kind of talking at the poor countries. And I use this example. I'm like, when's the last time you heard like a love story come out of the Muslim world? You have to go back to Aladdin. That's how far back you have to go for like a positive story about any Muslim country. Two brown people on a flying carpet. Is there, it's a great story. Two brown people in an actual aircraft, that scares the hell out of them. So it's just about, changing that narrative and, kind of actually accepting these other stories that are coming out. But the actual what ends up happening is that people like playing to their knowledge base. If you've been told your whole life that Pakistan is a bad place and terrorist things happen, when you pick up the newspaper and you read that something happened in Pakistan and it's bad, you get like a dopamine rush to the head because they're like, oh, see, I was right about this place the whole time. I am smart. I knew exactly about this country what I wanted to. Why would you challenge yourself then and be like, wait, let's go, let's listen to this folk music and let's hear about these interesting, amazing stories that they'll spend 9 hours kind of like sifting through Netflix trying to find that regular kind of program. But if it's not on there, they're not going to go looking for it because it's just not part of the narrative that they actually want in their head.
Yusra, because you of course also work for an Indian media outlet, so we've talked about Bollywood movies, and there's obviously like a broad reception of Indian cultural output in Pakistan. Does this also happen the other way around? Is there is the reception of Pakistani culture and cultural products in India? Is there any discussion of that, or does that relationship only go one way?
I think our music industry has flourished immensely over the past decade or decade and a half. And I think it has been one of the greatest ambassadors of Pakistan outside the region and within the region itself. India itself has been a huge fan of the hugely popular underground music scene. Coke Studio, which is one of Pakistan's most famous music shows, has been testament to that. And I just have received multiple phone calls, messages, emails from friends across the border, absolutely appreciating, lauding the newest season that has just come out. So I think our music, yes, our television, yes, but our films, not so much. We adopt a lot of the Bollywood culture. Bollywood is our go-to film kind of industry. We don't have much of our own. So in the absence of one, their icons have become our icons. And I think have become part of our subconscious and our social fabric. So our nuances, our innuendos, our metaphors are very Bollywood heavy. So I think it's reciprocal. It happens both ways. Bans and not allowing one's art to filter through officially from border to border cannot prevent it from reaching audiences on either side.
Thank you. There was one additional question that just came in from the audience, again about sort of a bilateral relation of Pakistan with another country that I wanted to put in because I think it's interesting, and that is about Pakistan-UK relations. So obviously there's a bit of history there, and the current British Prime Minister, of course, has been touting his global Britain concept for a while. But the question here says, we don't really hear a lot of that front. So let's maybe hear, Saad, from the Pakistani side. Like, is our relationships with the UK something that are being discussed? Is that a factor, or is that something that's not really in play here?
I don't think it sounds like CPAC without the money, to be honest. It's just it's just kind of one of those things where like Britain was an old colonial power, and they kind of, they came here and ever since they've gone, I don't think, I think that any other country, the US, even China, everything, have much more kind of say in what happens in Pakistan than the UK. The only time people here in Pakistan get upset with the UK is when they stop issuing visas. And then they're like, oh, where's my visa? And then they start giving visas again. They're like, okay, it's fine. So I think that it's really, I think that the UK wants to be a global player, and any country that was that big an empire would want to have their say. But for right now, I don't think it's very high on the agenda in Pakistan.
Thank you. And Yusra, asking you about a different relationship, but again, short question on the Pakistani view on its relationship with the United States. Obviously, again, there is some history there, but also we've talked about sort of the pivot is how somebody here from the audience calls the pivot of Pakistan to China. How does that impact its sometimes fraught relationship with the US? Is that becoming weaker? Is that working, or is there still a fairly strong connection?
I think with what's happened in Afghanistan and Pakistan's relationship with China, Pakistan and the US are really figuring out their new equation. And I think we're in the process of seeing how it's going to be plotted over the next couple of years or decades, so to say. We do see the interest once again heighten vis-a-vis the US in Pakistan. We do see a lot of COVID vaccine diplomacy going on. Millions of vaccines have been released to Pakistan. In fact, the largest recipient of vaccines from the US has been Pakistan. So in different ways, in different kind of sectors, we do see collaboration. But Mr. Khan still awaits that call from President Biden. So I think there are a lot of ifs and buts here. So we have to see how this pans out over the next few months. But yes, there is very definitely an equation, one that needs sorting, but a very important equation that exists between the US and Pakistan.
Excellent. Thank you both so much for all these tremendous insights. We could go on forever, but we are sort of coming slowly to the end of the hour. And as always, there are some final questions that we want to ask all our panelists in the A Closer Look series. We're starting with one of my favorite ones. I call this the travel agent question. Saad, if we come to Pakistan, which I truly hope we can come very soon, what's your best advice? Where should we go and what should we eat?
Oh, where should you go and what you should eat? I think, well, in Pakistan, I guess that you should really go everywhere. It's one of those kind of north-south countries where you have the, you have the all the way from the ocean all the way up to like the forests. You can kind of find things to do over here depending on what you want. But also, yeah, I think that you should taste all the foods. If you probably end up coming to Karachi first, and the chicken tikka was invented in Karachi. So this is where it's from. So now there's chicken tikka masala and there's chicken tikka pizza and there's chicken tikka, they culturally appropriated all of our chicken tikkas everywhere. But if you want a real one, it's fantastic and it's high protein. And, if I'm stuck on a desert island, I think that's the food I would choose to have every day if I could.
What makes it so good? Like what makes you crave chicken tikka when you're away from Pakistan? Or
it's just that they cook it, like they barbecue it, and so from the distance between it going from the barbecue to your plate it's a very small amount of time. So it's just you're eating like this piping hot fresh food, and it's really spicy, so it just covers all the bases of what I like in a meal.
Thank you. Yusra, turning this over to you, what is your you can give us a more specific travel recommendation after Saad said we should go everywhere. So we covered everywhere. So where would you recommend that we go in Pakistan, and what would you recommend that we eat?
I think Saad's suggestion about it being a north-south country, you should land in Karachi and progress up from seaside to mountainside and drive up all the way to the north, see the highest peaks. We have some of the highest peaks in the world. Come and experience the best. But I think I'm pescatarian, so giving you meaty recommendations that Pakistan is known for would not be my forte. But I would recommend what is known as Pakistan's very own desi burger. It's known as the bun kebab, and you must have it. It's a lentil patty covered with an egg, and it also has a potato variant. It's the nicest, cheapest, and the easiest snack or meal you can pick up anywhere in Pakistan. So the bun kebab is my recommendation.
I realize now that we're always doing these events at lunchtime here in Switzerland. That just, it sounds so good right now. I have to restrain myself to not run out and try to get one of these, which I know that I can't here. We talked so much about Pakistan today, and I personally learned so much from you guys, but of course, there's a lot more to say. So we also wanted to ask either of you for your recommendations, for the audience, if they wanted to dig in a little bit more, what's the best thing to watch or read about Pakistan. And Yusra, let me just say with you, because you actually mentioned Coke Studio already, which is your favorite Pakistani music show. Can you talk a little bit more about it? What makes it so good? Why should we watch it? What can we learn about Pakistan from watching it?
I think what makes Coke Studio one of our greatest ambassadors is the fact you may like a song, you may not like a song, but you have to acknowledge that it serves to bring to the fore a repertoire of music, a repertoire of culture, multiple genres of diversity that otherwise you don't see from Pakistan. Anything you hear about Pakistan is generally negative. So anything that serves to bring to the fore some of Pakistan's greatest, multicultural assets, for me, would be its greatest ambassadors. And I think Coke Studio has done just that over the past 14 seasons. And I would urge everyone, this is not an advert, they haven't paid me, but go and listen in. They've put out a few songs, go and listen in, find us your favorite and come back to us. We'll send you our recommendations as well.
Thank you. Saad, what's your recommendation? What should we read or watch or listen to that will help us better understand Pakistan?
Yeah, I was thinking about this the whole interview, and I think that what people should do is there's this whole groundswell, literally a groundswell of content being created and rising from TikTok, and it is the most democratic thing that has happened for the people in a very long time, by which anyone with a cell phone can go and make content, and they've become kind of these massive cultural sensations. And it depends, and people, it just depends on where you live and who you know and how they react to it. But everyone with a cell phone is making these TikTok videos. It's empowered them to make their own stories and decide that, well, fine, we might not know how to figure out how to write scripts or shoot films or anything like that, but they pick up a cell phone and they're like, oh, this is what we're going to talk about. Oh, this is the cell phone we're going to shoot it on. Nothing can stop us. So, if you can somehow figure out how to change your location settings and watch those TikTok videos coming out of Pakistan, you will see people who have invested probably their life savings in a phone, and they are making videos, and it shows you just on a basic day-to-day level what people are doing over here. So it's truly amazing.
Excellent. Thank you so much for both of these recommendations. We'll be sure to also include links, if we can, in the wrap-up email to our attendees, linking to those recommendations. One final thing as we sort of wrap up this episode on Pakistan, the next episode in 2 weeks from now, February 24, which will be moderated by Noel Culhane, is going to be on the Philippines. And so tradition has it that we're always asking our speakers of a current episode to give us one question that you would like us to put to the panelists of the next episode. So Saad, you first. What's something you've always wanted to know about the Philippines?
Oh, I think that I always want to know how they've managed to keep their beaches so clean. I see these pristine kind of beaches, in these travel videos. I don't know if that's actually the case because I don't get there, and I see my own beach next to my house, and it's just it is not clean. Let me just put it there. And I'm wondering, how do they take ownership over this natural resource of theirs, and they all decide together, because it's just they have their own industries, they have their own kind of mechanisms by which there must be pollutants and trash and everything over there. But how do they manage it? I'd love to know that.
I think that's a very good and very practical question. We'll be sure to ask that. Yusra, what's your Philippine question that we can pass along next time?
Asia 21 took us to Philippines not so long ago for a summit, and I think they're very much like Pakistan, both socially, economically, and politically. I think my question would be, in a country like Philippines, how important is people power when shaping direction for the future?
Excellent. Also, very good question. We'll be sure to include both of these questions in the conversation next time. For now, Saad Haroon, Yusra Askari, thank you so much. This has been very, very cool. I learned a ton. a very entertaining conversation about Pakistan. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. We hope to have you back, of course, at Asian Studies Switzerland, but mostly we hope that we can come visit you in Karachi, eat all that delicious food that you mentioned, and of course, if you ever come our way in Switzerland, I don't know if you have that much delicious food, but it's a pretty nice place to be. So maybe you want to come. For now, thank you everybody for joining us today, for all your fantastic questions. Again, Saad, Yusra, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.